You are about to watch the incredible true story of the American Revolution, the war that gave birth to the United States of America and changed the course of world history forever. By December of 1777, the Revolution was hanging by a thread. After months of brutal combat, Washington led his exhausted, battered army away from the front lines, marching them toward a winter encampment at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. When they arrived, there were no grand celebrations. There were no warm barracks and no comfortable beds waiting for them. The men had to immediately begin cutting timber, racing the dropping temperatures to build hundreds of simple wooden huts. The army had entered a survival phase where mere endurance served as their only strategy. By crowding into these shelters, the soldiers were holding the rebellion together simply by refusing to succumb to the elements. The cold quickly became crippling. Freezing winds ripped through a camp filled with men lacking proper shoes and wearing torn, ragged uniforms. As food supplies ran desperately low, a biological crisis followed. Extreme cold, severe malnutrition, and tightly packed wooden huts created the perfect environment for disease. Outbreaks swept through the encampment, claiming the lives of thousands of soldiers. Across the colonial divide, the British High Command watched and waited, knowing the severe lack of American supplies. They expected the rebellion to dissolve naturally under the weight of the winter conditions. For Washington's men, the immediate threat wasn't British muskets. It was the crushing force of nature and the looming threat of total internal collapse. Washington watched his men suffer and recognized a hard truth. To survive the winter and ever fight again, his forces needed strict military discipline just as urgently as they needed food and weapons. Then, help arrived from an unlikely source. A former Prussian military officer named Baron Friedrich von Steuben rode into the American camp. Von Steuben looked at the disorganized volunteers and immediately implemented a relentless regimen of standardized military drilling. Day after day, he forced the men to march in uniform steps, load their weapons at the exact same pace, and fire together. This endless repetition worked. The grueling, mechanical drills steadily hammered a chaotic, fragmented militia into a functional, standardized military machine. But von Steuben's tactical training did not cure the starvation, freezing temperatures, or the spread of disease. The physical suffering remained a daily reality. On top of the physical pain, heartbreaking letters arrived from struggling families back home, while the continental currency the soldiers were paid in lost nearly all of its value. The temptation to desert was overwhelming. Every day, soldiers weighed their unbearable physical reality against their commitment to the revolutionary cause. To prevent a mass mutiny, Washington continuously walked through the camps to encourage his men, while he simultaneously sent fierce letters pressuring Congress for logistical support. Through sheer willpower, the army held together. They were mastering combat tactics in the snow, while simultaneously winning an internal battle against total despair. Eventually, the severe cold broke. By the spring of 1778, the snow melted away, and the Continental Army emerged from the Pennsylvania woods. They were no longer the broken, disjointed volunteers of December. They stepped out of Valley Forge as a unified, disciplined, and formidable fighting force. By enduring the freeze, the Americans had successfully secured the most critical strategic asset of all: time. Proving their military viability convinced King Louis XVI that the Americans could survive a long war. Within months, France signed a formal alliance, committing their money, troops, and navy to the American side. Merely surviving the encampment legitimized the American cause, securing the exact foreign backing they needed to stand a chance at victory. The French alliance transformed the naval balance of power. French warships began patrolling the coast, directly challenging the British blockade and threatening the Royal Navy's control over the Atlantic. Looking at this historical map, you can see how the theater of war expanded far beyond the American coast. Britain was no longer fighting a localized rebellion. They were now locked in a full-scale international war against global enemies. Forced to counter this expanding global threat, the British military command pivoted. They began shifting their strategy toward the American South, setting the stage for a much more brutal phase of the conflict. The winter at Valley Forge turned out to be the anvil. Out of the sickness and starvation, Washington produced the professional, disciplined force that would dismantle the British hold on the colonies. To be continued in Episode 9, the war turned south. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to History Stories Dose so you never miss the next chapter of history.